I've been thinking about what to share with you guys today, aside from the amazing footages of on the bay. This is what you can see on the bay in one single day. Whale shark, mantas, dolphins, but it's more like a thinking of why are we collecting the data that we are collecting, and how much data do we really need, for how long, and at what scale. And that brings us back to what is our research question. They bring us back to what issue are we trying to solve. And I think the mental process, it's very important, because you ended up with 70,000 lines on Excel of data that you may only need 5,000. And you have wasted your time, people's time they have collected the data. It's an effort, especially when you have community collecting the data that then you're not going to need. And it's a cost, right? We always complain about how much electricity we spend with AI, but all the data center space, everything has a cost, right? So I think it's important to walk through the iteration of how do we actually get to the final, and it's never final, right? Because things evolve constantly. But a form or a data set on EarthRanger that we are happy with, and how do we, I'll share with you how our mental process went from full data sets on paper with handheld GPS and camera, and then how we try to integrate things in one place. But I'll encourage you guys to come to Palawan. This is oceanic manta rays, the only place that you can see them in the Philippines today. But, okay, so what data are we looking for? Like, what unit are we trying to measure? And everything is not the answer, right? We want more stuff, but then doesn't give us the stuff that we need. And we made a lot of mistakes, and I'll share a few very simple one that I've discovered this morning. So it's a constant process. Are we looking for tracks? Are we looking for use, effort? Are we looking for single event, like shark bycatch individual events? We want to know where the fishermen are, how often they are, where they are, how fast they travel. Do we need photos? And if we need photos, is any photos okay? Or we need photos that can lead us to the species identification? And one of the integration that we spoke about in the last few days, and it was represented in Gundi, we can integrate in the very short, like already on iNaturalist, right? And in the short term, in the very short future with WildMe, there are citizen science dedicated platform, but they're used by researchers as well. And iNaturalist allows you to identify a species. So it has a machine learning, an AI, that you put a photos and it tells you what's the highest probability the species is. It gives you some information on the species. And WildMe is a dedicated platform to identify individual based on individual characteristic for that species. Can be the white spot of a butanding, of a whale shark, could be the patterns in the belly of the manta, but also could be like the spot pattern of a giraffe, right? So they're or a tokai gecko. They're very specific for the species that they are. So you can identify a masquerade, like in this case, but you can also identify, if you release that animal, you can identify if that single individual has been caught again, but a unique spot pattern on this animal, right? So think about what data do we really need. And that brings us to the next point, that is, there is infinite option, right? You can ask as many questions as you want. You really need to think about how you're going to use that, the data afterwards. And this is just a basic, like, iterative process, but you really want to go between the initial planning, your requirement, and the analysis, and go back, test it, and go back all the time. Like one of our mistakes, for example, is that in San Vicente, one of our sites, we actually have no internet. Is so bad. Like we have no internet. We need to go and beg for Starlink at the only resort that is on the area. And for 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of our monitoring, our local project leader didn't go to the resort and didn't sit down and really look at how the data were coming in. And for the first 3 weeks, we made a lot of mistakes because we assume that our team in the field interpret the the field the same way that we designed it. And we assume that the fishers understood what has been explained or trained once, how to understand our forms. So go through this until you're really safe or you're really sure that you're happy with it. But we'll go through it all the time, because the great things of EarthRanger is in the last 3 months you have seen so many changes for better, but you need to, some of them require you to rethink how you collect that data. And this is how we start and how we go back and forth. How do you report the data and what data and who can report this data? So your best friends are the subject, the group. So by using your subject group, you can decide a different way you can filter the data after to look at your data, but also how the different user can see the different event categories. And how do you separate these is very important, because it affects how easy it is to find or to direct the eyes of the fishermen, for example, to report easily exactly what you want to report. And it can be the fisher, but can be the Bantai Gubat, can be anyone in your team, can be a citizen scientist. And when you create your event type, the choice of these is not an aesthetic choice. It's also an aesthetic choice. You need to know how much space they take on their mobile phone, right? For example, depending on if you use a pad versus if you use a mobile phone. But each of these allow you to analyze the data in a different way. The same one when you're doing a social survey and you use a Likert scale 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 7, they are not just different aesthetics, they give you different interpretation of the data, right? So you really need to think about how you're going to use this data. For example, here you have a difference between a drop down or a list, and then your list, you're going to create it, but you can select only one, or you can select more than one. And is selecting one mandatory or not to move forward in their reporting? Will you choose a list or a drop down to make their life easier, or you want an answer where it's descriptive? And then the descriptive, can you guide a description, for example, by using hints inside the description? And my only advice is really think about it. Play with it, make events, delete events, really play at the best way that you think your user will use it, but also sit with them, give the phone to them, make them try it, and then sit down and debrief with them so they tell you what did not work for them. So these are things that you want to think about. It's at least multiple choice or single choice. Is this field required or not, right? Because if you assume that some information for you is very important, but it's not for the reporter, then you may never get the answer that you need. But also if you make everything required, an event where the user don't have that information, they may either put information that are not accurate, or they're just gonna not report because it takes too much time. And I'll give you a simple example. This is our survey. Before, we had an event called wildlife sightings, and when many of had a drop-down menu where you can just select one of the species. But then if I go to Ecoscope today and I ask to filter by the event type, it just tells me wildlife sightings. I don't know which wildlife it is, right? As it is. But then for our whale shark, we just created events that are specific for the things that I want to see on the map, right?
That's the purpose of the event details workflow in Ecoscope. So
I thought this was from the details.
I think that's the events workflow.
Okay.
And the details workflow will drill into a field.
Okay, see, you never stop learning. Yes.
Sorry.
No, it's great, right?
Interrupt, but
yeah. So think about it, email them, because they know how these things works. But always question it, question yourself, I mean. For us, for easy of mapping, we went to creating separate events. This is our research team, so we have different things that we want to see on the map when we just use a dashboard. But yeah, think about it, how you want your event to look like, and the different kind of event. So these are encounters that for us are very specifically defined, versus, for example, sightings. We have a whale shark sighting versus a whale shark encounter. A whale shark encounter is an encounter where our researchers are going in the water and they are collecting additional information, versus a sighting is I only know presence or absence of that species. So our form is very short. And I'll give you two examples. One is the marine turtle beach patrolling. The form started being created based on the DNR form. There are several forms from strandings, necropsy, nesting, and nesters. And we try to simplify it by creating specific form for specific users. That goes from much more complicated for our research team to slightly simplified in Tagalog for the patrollers, the local community, to the AFP patrollers in Kalayaan, where they only report a nest, have a single bottle. So they all report the same things, but a very different scale of details. And you can see this is our reporter from our researchers. We have environmental condition that we think it will influence or predict the turtle coming out to lay the eggs, to information about the clutch size, the nest location, the nest type, to all the information about the nest that are necessary for the relocation. And this one expand on the DNR form, meaning that we could report this directly to DNR and allow the local community to satisfy the DNR requirements. And we started in San Vicente because today is the largest documented nesting area in Palawan, and we have around 500, 600 nests per season. And after patrolling the whole season, we walk around 3,000 kilometers last year. Then we kind of refined the way the EarthRanger can be used. We try to simplify it as much as possible. And since May, we expanded the use to different communities. So it took a year for us, or a season for us, to kind of stream down, test, see what worked, what didn't work, and then be ready to scale it up. So today, we have Puerto Princesa, City Endro, the LGU, so the different community in San Vicente, Kalayaan Island Group, and Senro Brooks, so Ursula Island and the south of Palawan. And I guess the next step for the turtle will be how the different things that we have not learned yet, how do we make it easier for the different protected data management offices, for example, to visualize and use this data. So San Vicente, the nesting is inside Malampaya Sound Protected Seascape. So very basically, and I know it's not I've learned this week that it's not the most refined way, but I create a user for the protected area office that can only view and download, so that they don't report or they don't modify the other event, but they can anytime log in into the platform and see our patroller patrolling in real time. They are quite far to intervene, but at least they give them the option if they want to be involved in real time. Ursula, for example, they just started Ursula Marine Wildlife Refuge, I think is the name, but they just started last month, and the assistant protected area superintendent, the APASO, is really keen. So she used it, the ranger used it, they have their own account now as a user, and they modified, check their data every day. So depending on the level of engagement of the final user that you want to use. But we were discussing this week how to find how we can create account for all these government agencies to see the data. And this one is very simple, but the power is the tool is very powerful. For example, this is one of the Kalayan Island group where we have access for 5 days a year, and but the AFP are there all year round. And we still have no authorization to do an official training every 2 months when they change. But we create a form that is so easy, just report a nest, that we manage to record the basic information and ideally the seasonality of when these animals are around with a just very one single option patrol button, right? So it's not ideal, but it's much better than we ever had. And because the place is so remote, but they have Starlink, and there is no way for us to train them to collect additional data, it's still a very simple way to collect nesting information. So these are the data coming from the AFP. And this is a starting point. Like ideally, the Coast Guard will expand their use, their training of their uniformed personnel in general. And Palawan with the West Command is really proactive into this thing. So it's a very good starting point. And one thing that we really struggle at the beginning because we had a lot of users and some of our data that we collect are quite technical. We started to think about how we can report when we make mistakes. Because you know that on the app, we don't, you can't really, the user doesn't really change if something is submitted. You can't really change the event. Correct me guys if I'm wrong. Huh? So we create an event correction notes, and we create a different event collection node depending how complicated is our data form. From a very basic, where you say the event number and describe what need to correct. Even easier, sometimes we just ask the user just to take a screen grab of the event that was wrong and upload it here, so that it will be easier for the manager at the end of the day to look at these green events, their correction, find events that need to be modified, and be sure at the end of each day our data sets are clean. So next step for us that we're really excited is how we can integrate like photo identification. We photo identified every nester that we encounter. We do not do flipper tagging because we think it's too invasive, and we can talk about it more. But we do photo identification of all the nesters. So we have a catalog, and the catalog is on Wild Me for Turtle. That is called Internet of Turtle. So it's public. Everyone can go and match their photo identification for the turtle that lay the eggs in Palawan. If it goes to Zambales, to La Union, to Subic, and somebody take a photo, so we can match them. And the integration of this would be really cool. And as well, our satellite data, we tagged 8 olive ridley turtle. I will show you later maybe this, but this is the internesting season. So how do they move in between the nesting within the season? So they do 4 to 5 nests in one season. An interesting part that it really overlaps with a lot of the drift net data that are coming from our fishery project. So the turtle actually is spending a lot of time in an area where there is a high fishing effort. And then the turtle went down and moved quite far apart, and it'll be very important, I think, to be sure that this data can be used by researchers that are in Sabah, in Sarawak, and in Brunei, because these are data that are relevant at international scale that is beyond what a small local NGO like us could reach. And these are some of the tags that are very interesting. So if you want to manage a species at larger scale, where are these animals going, right? So this is a foraging ground in Holo. This is a foraging ground. This is inside an oil field in Sarawak, right? This one went north and stopped there. So again, you need to think about what data we're collecting and how we're going to use it and why you're collecting in the first place. And then I'll show you quickly just a different kind of survey for the whale sharking on the bay. This is our three goal of using EarthRangers, monitor the aggregation in terms of individual, having a spatial distribution and time distribution across the bay. We would like the city to declare as a critical habitat, but we need to know where the animals are, when the animals are around. And then there is a booming tourism industry. So we're trying to monitor the tourism industry. We have a researcher on each tourist vessel, and we are trying to understand how the tourism can interact sustainably with the whale shark. This is our event categories, so you can see all the events that we monitor. We monitor effort to try to understand, quantify how many shark per survey unit, like an hour of survey, or a day of survey, or a kilometer of survey. And we're talking earlier, we have a whale shark encounter, and the whale shark encounter are pretty detailed, because it tried to answer questions that we have been doing this project since 2017, and this is the first year using EarthRanger. So this is basically, we moved exactly the paper form into the digital form. That is probably not the best way looking forward, but we try to maintain compatibility within the old data and the new data. And there is a mix of different drop-down menu, yes and no option, numeric options, and for example, for behavior, it's both text and multiple choice. So you can make your form as you want, just think about how much information. These take around 3 minutes for our researchers to fill up. Do you have 3 minutes per an event? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Again, the table form that we talked about earlier for the shark fisheries, if you have 20 shark and you only have 15 minutes, you cannot spend 3 minutes per shark, right? Because the fishermen want the shark back. So this one you think about how complicated your data set will be. And the same for the tourism interaction. For example, we measure when we are in the water, and that's something that we haven't figured out yet. Before we bring a slate, like a waterproof paper in the water, and every minute we count how many tourists there are within 5 meters and more than 5 meters away from the shark, to look if the guides enforce the guidelines from the Joint Memorandum Circular number 1, that is wildlife tourism interaction in the Philippines. So we're trying to quantify how much people comply or non-comply with the tourism interaction guidelines that are presented to them during the briefing. But we don't bring our mobile phone on the water, right? So is EarthRanger in this case the best way for collecting that type of data? So today, we write a summary when we come back, whoops, but we still bring the slate on the water, and when we come out, we take a photos of the slate, and the data are there connected with the location and the timestamp of the EarthRanger event, but they still will have to be encoded once you go back on land. Can we find a better way? I hope so, because you go back on land and you add another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of work after you already spend 11 hours on the sea that day. And again, this is the whale shark movement in the Sulu Sea from satellite tagging. Can we integrate this in real time or in semi-real time, so that when our team is out, or the tourism boats are out, or the fishing vessels are out, they know where the whale sharks or the wildlife is, for example. A lot of people are talking as one of the main threats globally for whale shark and large whale is ship strikes, and there is a lot of localized app like Whalewise that integrate the position of the animal, both reported by people or through satellite tag to cargo shipping vessel or ferry, so they can slow down, for example. We don't have this data from the Philippines because no one uses AIS, right? So it's very hard to understand where the animals are and when the ships are. But that's something that we as a small group, we're looking for Puerto, we're looking at the ship traffic, and we're trying to overlap the presence of the animal, the fisheries, and see how everyone interacts. Okay, last slide. Do we engage the people that we need to reach? And that's, I think, is our largest struggle at the moment. In Palawan, there is maybe around 200 to 250 different patrollers that patrol, community patroller, they interact with the turtle during the season from November to May. How do we reach them? How do we ensure that they have a tool for collecting the data? How do we support them in data collection? And now we ensure that they can themselves see the data that they are collecting and understand them. And does your project or our project needs to scale up, and how big it need to be? Like, are you happy with a small data set? Is that what you need because that's what you're trying to manage? Or you want a larger scale? For example, the fishery project for the shark, I don't think it can scale up that much just because it's so much effort. So sustaining that level of detail of data collection over the 2 million small-scale fish in the Philippines will be very complicated. It's so much work, right? But if we can use some site as pilot to quantify what we don't understand with the other data set, with the NSAP data set, for example, with the data that the MAU has, and we can understand where the gaps are, maybe that's the goal of the project, more than quantify at large how many sharks are landed. And then, can we engage different kind of users? We have old fishermen that don't know how to write and read. Can we set up forums where they are only using icons for very simple communication? And that's something that will be very interesting to test. We're doing, we have a media impact campaign that's been running for a year. We made a film, and then we showed the film to the different community about sharks and people in Palawan relationship. It's called Iyo ang Dagat. And the impact campaign is non-verbal, meaning people can just circle icons for their answer to be sure that everyone can answer the questions. So there are cool ways that we can expand our user or target referred users. And then this for me is, because at the moment, I'm the one looking at all this data in our team, how do we do not collect data that we do not need, right? How do we streamline and simplify it, and we go back and forth to this. So that's it. But I just encourage you really to reach out to the team, because they have all the knowledge and they can help you. But really think about what data you really want to collect, and how you best use EarthRanger, because it's an amazing tool. But it's a tool, right? So you need to think about the answer that you are trying to get to.